And director Todd Haynes. Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you for having us.
Todd, I'd love to start with you and sort of how the script came to you and what you found so intriguing about telling the story.
The script came to me at the sort of height of COVID days that we all remember well, where everything was stopped. I was actually reading more material than usual because we were all, speculating when we would get back to work on what. And I got this script from Natalie Portman. She sent me the script to May-December by Samy Burch. And my producers, Christine Vachon and Pam Koffler, had read it before, and they suspected that I might respond to this. And they were right. It was just such an incredibly original piece of work by a writer I did not know. This is the first produced film that Samy's written. But man, what an amazing person she is, and we've all been enjoying getting to know her on these stages. She handled this complicated tangle of characters and histories with such restraint and such a kind of faith in the reader. That was one thing that really singled this script out. But it made you uncomfortable, and it made you question your own presumptions about who these characters were and how you would trust them and how you would travel with them through the course of the story. And it became finally an opportunity for me. I'd been wanting to work with Natalie on something. This seemed like an ideal project. And then there was this second lead role. And it didn't take long for me to think of this one over here.
That was going to be my next question, is how soon after reading this were you like, Julianne Moore, who are you? And what was it like when you first talked to Todd about it? Did he give you the script right away? Do you have more of a conversation between the two of you?
One of the great miracles of my life has been this creative collaboration. I don't know how I got so lucky to be able to work with him so many times. But people ask me this a lot. They're like, so what is it? Do you and Todd talk about stuff? Or, do you develop stuff? And I'm like, it's always just a phone call or an email out of the blue, And I just got an email from him saying, Julie, I want to slip you this script because Natalie Portman sent it to me and I'm really interested in it. And I want to gauge your interest before I go back to her, And I was like, are you directing this? And he was like, yeah. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, like what a gift, just like to land from the sky like that. I think especially as an actor, when you do so powerless, you're just waiting. You're like, hey, something just showed up. But I was staggered by it, and I think that the script is one of the things I said to Samy is that it has this deceptive simplicity. And as we were working on it and playing with it, it's so muscular. It holds so much intellect, thought and feeling. It was extraordinary.
Charles, I assume your journey to being in the film was a little different than an email. But tell me about how you ended up on this. What kind of audition process you may have had to go through?
Yeah, I got an email from my reps, and it said, it was the script and the signs for Joe, and it was starring Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore, directed by Todd Haynes, and I was like, is this a prank? And I ended up, that kind of just started this 6-week process of me self-taping, and I really kind of, was like discovering my process during that time. And after after my first tape, my team sent me these notes, and they were like, these are from Todd Haynes, and I was like, no, they're not. And the tape, and the next thing I knew, I was flying to New York to do a chemistry read with Julie and Todd, and we were standing outside I was standing outside of Laura Rosenthal's casting office, and I heard Julie and Todd talking, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're behind this door. And the light was coming beneath the cracks of the door. Then I opened the door, and Julie was right there, wearing all white, and the sun was behind her. No, but it was. Then I completely blacked out and got out of the room, and I was like, I don't know what just happened, but I remember at that point I was like, wow, this is like, no matter what happens, this is the gift. Like, I just got to work on this for 6 weeks, and I just met Todd Haynes and Julianne Moore and had the best experience. And then that led to Savannah, Georgia for 23 days.
So tell me what you two remember about that chemistry read and meeting Charles and glowing in white apparently.
That's nice, Charles. Thank you. He had me at hello. Right? No, but I loved him. I mean, from the minute I saw him, honestly, I felt very excited and felt really, it was wonderful. It's wonderful to be there at that moment when somebody comes in and nails it, really gets it. And he had, he was so, as that character, he has such a receptivity, I think, to him as a character of Joe. Somebody who was really able to handle all this stuff that Gracie was throwing at him. He was so very present and really human and really simple and specific. And I was totally convinced, seriously, the minute that I saw him. We also oddly have a lot of things in common. He was born in Juneau, Alaska. I lived in Juneau, Alaska. Both of our dads were in the army. We both lived in Germany. We both have mothers from another country. So it was kind of weird. I was like, this is the guy! Yeah.
Todd, what was it about Charles that made you say this is the guy?
Well, it started, I had that experience of watching his audition tape before we asked him to read with the final options of actors. And there were some wonderful actors in this group. But Charles, and I didn't know Charles's work from Riverdale. I didn't know his work from anywhere, and I think this was all moving very, very quickly. We didn't know when we were going to shoot May December when I first read it, and when I brought it to Julianne Moore, and I had other Julianne Moore. I know.
He's my whole name.
Yes, we just met. And I was working on something else, and Julie was working on something, Natalie was working on something, and all of a sudden, something I was working on went away. This was last year. And I said to Christine and Pam, do you think there's any way we could do May December? And the fall opened up with Julianne's schedule, Natalie's schedule, which is tricky. These are busy people. And I was like, could we do this then? So we jumped on this. And so it all was moving very quickly. And I think something about that energy informed everything that happened on this movie and on set. But so Laura Rosenthal I've been working with forever, and I jumped into the role. The challenge, the remarkable challenge, I think a bigger one than we probably even could have imagined, of casting the right Joe. Because the whole film is poised to yield to that third act where Joe really steps forward. And something Charles did in that audition was so delicate and so fragile and so... I saw the present tense Joe in his instincts, in his first ideas about the character, but I also saw the whole history. And that was something I had yet to really see. I was a little nervous about looking back at how that relationship started, and we all filled that in our own way, I think, in the process. But what Charles did, his instincts started to fill in the whole story for me.
So for the two of you, what kind of research do you do outside of the script? It sounds like it was a pretty quick turn to getting on set, but do you look at stories from the news that are sort of parallel to what, you know, these two people went through, or do you find inspiration from people you know? How do you prepare?
You know, Todd was really adamant that this story, that we were working on this story, the story of the screenplay. That was our document. That being said, there obviously is a lot of resource material out there, and I did look at that. I looked at news stories and, you know, different kinds of coverage and just kind of whatever I could. But honestly, you take those ideas and you always go back to the screenplay, and it was so specifically drawn. And certainly because Samy so brilliantly set this story 20 years after this incredible transgression, and brought in Natalie Portman's wonderful character to come in and observe, to then play them. There's a different lens on it, because then it ends up being, it's a story not only about what occurred and this relationship, but about these women in a struggle for narrative dominance. So it is a story, and Samy will say this too, that she was very, very much influenced by tabloid culture growing up in the 90s. That was kind of the height of all of those stories in the front of magazines and things. So it ends up being a movie too about the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we communicate to the world, whether or not our stories are true, who gets to tell the story, how are these stories informed by the culture that we live in, all of that. So it was kind of what was so amazing about it, what's so amazing about working with Todd again and again, I was just talking to him about this when we were waiting outside, is that he gives everything so much context. It's not, these stories end up not being just about these personal acts and transgressions that these people have had, but it's about what has happened to them culturally, what has informed their choices and their identities, and how are they performing these identities within this world.
The physicality of Joe, I think, is really interesting, and the choices you made. Can the two of you talk about sort of what you wanted him to look like, how you wanted him to walk and talk? I think it's a really interesting choice.
Yeah, well, when it came to Joe's physical appearance, Todd and I, we had a few discussions that we didn't talk about so much what he would look like, but what he would feel like. And I was looking at his history of being a 36-year-old father, 3 kids, about to be an empty nester, a provider, a loving husband, all these things. Like, there's not really too much time for Joe to find comfort in like a CrossFit class or something like that. And when it comes to like the physicality and stuff, there was Todd, he gave us a list of so many different films, and like, Persona, or The Graduate, Sunday, Bloody Sunday. There are so many great films to just really pull from, and really just understanding, with that, and just kind of, there's this like innate understanding of Joe that I had, where I think the emotional makeup of Joe internally, like, this is gonna sound so actory, but like, you can carry like traumas and emotions in your body. And, there's this sense of like this arrested development, and he's kind of like protecting himself. Joe doesn't want to take up space, and he's pre-verbal, and just really kind of understanding repression and how, not so much how that would sound, but just like feel in the body, like his history. And that was just some stuff that I did.
And obviously the dance between Natalie Portman and your character is such a fascinating part of the story. Todd, how did you cultivate that dynamic? Well, I'm guessing there wasn't a ton of time for rehearsals if this shot in 23 days. But
We didn't have time. We didn't have physical rehearsal time, especially with Natalie and Julie. Charles was in Savannah for ahead of time, which was so nice for us to have some time to get to know each other and talk about Joe, and talk about Charles's life and Charles's upbringing, and things that might help or be relevant. Things that I think you already knew, but it was great to verbalize it with you and share that with you. But a lot of discussion happened in advance with Julie and I, and with Natalie and I, about these characters. A lot of decisions that as you guys all know, you often have to start with very, very specific physical, concrete decisions about the color of the wigs, and the makeup, and the styling, and how Natalie's look and styling would change. We had to start in one place and watch her transform into Gracie bit by bit. But that whole burden of how that specific alchemy would occur rested on Julie's shoulders, because we didn't have rehearsal time. And so Julie had to really come up with, and we talked about it, but at a certain point we were just shooting, we were going. She had to come up with who Gracie was, how she sounded, how she moved, how she spoke. And so all of those things happened very, very quickly. But Natalie needed them as handles to her transformation as a character.
Yeah, it was weird because at one point we had so many scheduling issues that Todd said we might have to shoot Natalie first before I got to Savannah. And he was like, how are we gonna do this? Maybe you could talk to Natalie over Zoom?
That other movie.
The other movie that fell apart, but yeah. But I was like panicked because I thought, I don't know, But yeah, then that movie moved, thankfully, and I started really working seriously on what these concrete characteristics were going to be, because I knew I had to come in on day one, and I needed to have something to offer Natalie to copy, because she has to mimic me. So in working on the script, I was confused by Gracie's apparent control. I was like, it wasn't tracking with what I saw with her emotional volatility. I was like trying to figure this out, and then when you realize that she describes this as a great love story. She was rescued by a prince, and she is a princess. And in order to believe that, you elevate this child to being a man, and you remain forever a child yourself. So there's something, she's very genderized. She's really, there's this hyper femininity to her. So there's this kind of gestural things that I would have for Natalie. And then I started thinking about a vocal choice, and thought about childlike presentation, and Elizabeth, something that seems very childlike. And it's interesting when that's like a signifier. So I called Todd and I was like, thinking about this. But Natalie heard it for the first time on our first day together, and I was scared too, because you say your first line and you're like, oh, here it comes. Here comes the lisp. But and I saw her go,
She was overjoyed. She was ecstatic.
The tone of this film is really incredible. I've been saying that I think only Todd Haynes could ever have made this movie. But tell me about navigating that, the way it is funny sometimes, or is campy sometimes, or it is so dark and dramatic other times. How do you do it, Todd?
Well, look, what the script offered is a almost requirement for the reader to be thinking and questioning. And so I felt, in translating it to the screen, I wanted to make a space for the viewer to enjoy that process of navigating what they're seeing, and to be questioning it, and to be with an almost compulsion that was pleasurable, to question what you're watching and be interrogating yourself in some ways as you do so. And so there was, I guess, very simple way, or one way that was accomplished that you might see in the movie is the contrast between a restraint in the camera, where shots are held for very long. We do all these shots in mirrors, whole scenes, or sometimes single shots. We're almost caging the actors in the frame. So you're holding back in that way, but then the music plays a very aggressive frontal role. And that interaction, that kind of friction between the two, or frisson between the two, I thought would be kind of exciting and amusing and stimulating to the viewer. But look, all of these ideas are great on the page, and I'm inspired by a lot of great examples by filmmakers that I was looking at, films I was looking at. But it relies on the performances to make those ideas work. They're so they expose everything. There's no hiding places. When you hold on two actors in a shot for 6 minutes, and they're looking right into the lens as themselves, and off the lens as the reflection of the other, these are things which, if it's Ingmar Bergman, it doesn't work without Bibi Andersson and Rick Ullman. If it's this film, it doesn't work without these three extraordinary actors.
I understand the music you had before shooting, so as actors, was that something that influenced you? Did you listen to it? Or tell me about
Todd emailed me, again, all the emails, Todd. It was in the summertime. He said, "I want you to look at this Joseph Losey film, The Go-Between." And he said, the Michel Legrand score is so amazing, and the way he kind of punctuates these scenes where you think that there's something normal happening, and this swell of music. Because I wanted to do something like this. So, and then once we got there, he was actually playing that score for us. So we did know about that kind of punctuation, and it also gives you kind of an amazing freedom, because you know that Todd does so much of the work for you. You know, I mean, he's so wonderful and complimentary about us, but to have that kind of structure as an actor, to have that scaffolding, to have that framing, to have that musical punctuation, all of that happening all the time, it's very relaxing. It's like you know that Todd sees what you're doing and is basically framing it. So to have that musical punctuation, you're like, whoa, you know, it almost lets you lay back a little bit or something.
I loved when Todd, he would play the Go-Between soundtrack, and I remember every day was my favorite day filming, but I remember when Joe's like going through the garden and like looking for the monarch butterfly eggs and all that stuff, it was like for like an hour we were just blasting the music, and I was like looking through the leaves, and I was like so many different things. I was just like, oh my gosh, I was just in it. Is something bad gonna happen? What's behind this leaf? I don't know.
I do find it incredible this was a 23-day shoot. What was most, I mean, other than just being 23 days, but how did that sort of affect your experiences?
It made it thrilling. And because it was so tight, we all shared the music, we all shared the frames, the ideas, we shared and I mean the entire creative team. So we were all in the same place. And I think that put us all in the same creative space. And the energy behind that to make that possible fueled it.
And people were tremendously prepared, absolutely everybody. You know, Todd more so than anyone, and is incredibly communicative about his vision and his resources and his ideas. And so we all had that information, all of the actors, everybody, the whole production team. And I think people, we were ready. We didn't have a lot of time. We were ready, and we wanted to do it. And there was a level of excitement, I think, about the fact that we had this pressure, but there's a tremendous amount of joy too, because it was such a wonderful project with so many really interesting, creative people.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up with a little bit of a cheesy question for Charles and Julianne. What did you learn from each other about acting, working together on this?
I'll go. It's hard to put Julie into words or express. There's so much awe. I mean, she is legendary, iconic. But you know, I learned so much. But I'm just gonna pick one thing because there's many things. Really, just preparation and just understanding the character and the story, and we would have so much fun in between takes, but when those cameras were rolling, it was just hyper focus and concentration and just really just letting things go and just, you know, trusting in Todd. And you know, I always had this idea as an actor that you have to suffer, but I don't believe in that anymore. I don't think so. I just understand that there's just like a very technical preparation and just understanding and empathy and just like letting it go. And to have Julie, I mean, I think I just felt so empowered and uplifted by just not only her artistry, but really who she is. And I felt so supported every step of the way, and it's such a dream come true.
that's true. I really do think that that's true, that you don't. What was amazing about Charles is that here he was walking into a situation with a lot of people who had a tremendous amount of experience, and that could be terrifying. Mm-hmm. And instead, I saw an actor who wasn't terrified. I think he was available. His eyes were open. He was receptive to everything. If there was something that he didn't understand for some reason, he would ask a question. He didn't, he saw everyone as a human being. You know, sometimes your fear can shut you down and you feel like, oh shoot, I just gotta do this kind of thing. And what I saw with Charles was that he was just like open. You know, open to everything, looking at everything, learning from everything, present with everything that we did. And it was really, really beautiful to see. And also incredibly kind, you know, so thoughtful and so thoughtful of others in a place where it could have been really pressurized for him. So it was a beautiful thing to see someone not be shut down by an initial experience or fear, but to be like open and available to everything, and you could see it in his performance.
It's true.